Did you direct Mike Flynn to discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador
No, I didn't.
prior to your inauguration?
No, I didn't.
And would you have fired him if the information hadn't leaked out?
No, I fired him because of what he said to Mike Pence. Very simple. I didn't direct him, but I would have directed him because that's his job.
A surprising admission yesterday from the president that he would have directed National Security Advisor Mike Flynn to speak with the Russian ambassador about Russian sanctions while President Obama was still in office. Joining me now is NBC Chief Global Correspondent Bill Neely, who is in Moscow. Bill, so much of that news conference yesterday was about Russia. What is the reaction in Russia?
Well, surprisingly, Katie, that news conference wasn't broadcast live on any Russian state TV channel, including the 24-hour news channels like RT. And in fact, the official news agency TASS only carried one line about the news conference even hours after it was over, and that was just quoting Donald Trump talking about fake news. So it was difficult to get any reaction. This morning, the Kremlin's official spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, was asked by reporters if, in the light of some of President Trump's remarks, for example, saying yesterday that he wasn't sure that he would get on with President Putin, his comments earlier about Crimea, that Crimea was taken by Russia, also his statement that the US military would be built up kind of like you've never seen before. He was asked whether Russia was then disappointed in President Trump after 3 weeks. And he said, "We never wore rose-tinted glasses. We never had any illusions, so there's nothing to be disappointed with. Russia-US ties," he added, "are important, and we believe they deserve special attention." And it's those ties and the possibility of improved ties, that's the real question here. People are beginning to worry that maybe Donald Trump will not be able to effect new relations with Russia. And to that end, a very influential lawmaker here, Senator Pushkov, tweeted this morning, "There's a high probability that Trump won't drain the swamp in Washington, but the swamp will drag Trump in. And that'll be the end of his revolution that hasn't even started yet." So some doubts creeping in here in Moscow that President Trump will actually be able to forge a new relationship with Russia. Katie?
Interesting reaction. I want to ask you about something the Telegraph is reporting today, that the Kremlin has told its official newspaper, a warning essentially, that excessive Trumpophilia is not going to be good for the Kremlin, that it might end up harming the Kremlin. Is that why his press conference wasn't played on state TV yesterday?
Yeah, actually, the Kremlin ordered state TV to ratchet back, to pull back from some of its constant coverage of Trump. In January, Katie, Trump was on state TV more than Putin. That's not a good idea in an authoritarian state like Russia. So the Kremlin said to state TV, enough of this. Russian people don't want to see Trump on TV all the time, especially when so far he hasn't actually delivered anything. All we're getting is rhetoric. And indeed, I heard today that a lot of Russians were just fed up listening about appointments, about Mike Flynn, and so on. So yes, it was a deliberate policy to keep that news conference off state TV. Quite extraordinary, Katie.
Donald Trump on television in Russia more than Vladimir Putin. Remarkable. Bill Neely in Moscow. Thank you so much. Joining me now is Sean Henry.
Good evening. We know this conversation ended a little while ago, but what details have come out then? What do we know so far?
Well, Andrew, President Trump was scheduled to speak to 5 world leaders today, but his phone call with President Putin was undoubtedly the most anticipated one, and some would even argue the most important one. And it's fair to say that the phone call and the 2 leaders, well, they did not disappoint, as they vowed to work closely together and on a personal level to reboot Russian-U.S. ties, which have hit an all-time low under the previous administration. And the 2 leaders are expressing their willingness to do that, starting with Syria. Well, Trump was quoted as saying that he supports improving the real cooperation between Moscow and Washington to defeat ISIS and other terrorist groups in Syria. Here's how he put it earlier.
If we have a great relationship with Russia and other countries, And if we go after ISIS together, which has to be stopped, that's an evil that has to be stopped, I will consider that a good thing, not a bad thing.
We've also been reading reports that Trump will very soon sign an executive order to get his team to come up with a strategy to defeat ISIS within 30 days. Of course, it's too early now to guess what will be included in his strategy. But a few days ago, Trump did suggest setting up safe zones in Syria to help the people there. Here.
As president, I'll absolutely do safe zones in Syria for the people. I think that Europe has made a tremendous mistake by allowing these millions of people to go into Germany and various other countries. And all you have to do is take a look. It's a disaster what's happening over there.
Well, judging on that soundbite, it may sound like setting up safe zones is a good idea. But what Trump did not elaborate on is that it may lead to an escalation of American military involvement in the Syrian conflict, as safe zones would mean that there will be isolated territories set up within Syria but under U.S. control. Russia has also been vocal against this idea, as it may pave the way towards a U.S. intervention in the war-torn country. Now, Russia, so it really will be interesting to see how this cooperation between the U.S. and Russia will pan out. But judging on this phone call, well, it seems like the two leaders are quite optimistic about it.
Sure. OK, thanks, Emily. That was RT's Emily Sue.
I want to go now to NBC's Lucy Kavanagh in Moscow. Lucy, the Russia story is one that is going to be driving a lot of the foreign policy discussion for months to come. What can you tell us about what's happening where you are?
Well, Hallie, just to give you a sense of the mood here, when the U.S. election result was announced in the Duma, that's the Russian parliament today, the room exploded into claps and cheers. It's not just Putin congratulating Trump. The people that we've spoken to on the street, a lot of them are indifferent, especially the younger generation that doesn't really watch state-controlled television. But what we heard over and over again from many Russians is that they thought now, finally, U.S.-Russian relations will improve. They see Donald Trump as a representative of peace, as a peace candidate, now president-elect. And that is because the point of view here is that the United States is somehow seen as a danger to Russia, especially Clinton in their mind's eye. This is a message that's reinforced on state television channels over and over again. They think America is trying to ferment regime change under the guise of democracy. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has not publicly expressed any concern about Russia. He seems to be perfectly content, based on public statements so far, to let Russia do what it wants in areas that it's concerned with, like Syria and Ukraine. And that here, that's seen as a good thing. Hallie?
Lucy Kavanagh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Joining us live now from Moscow.
Хочу поздравить американский народ с завершением избирательного цикла.
And I'd like to congratulate the American people with the end of the electoral cycle.
А господина Дональда Трампа с победой на этих выборах.
And I'd also like to congratulate Mr. Donald Trump with his victory in these elections.
Мы слышали предвыборные заявления еще кандидата в президенты Соединенных Штатов.
We have heard his electoral slogans when he was still a candidate of the presidency,
которые были направлены на восстановление отношений между Россией и Соединенными Штатами.
And he spoke about resuming and restoring relations between Russia and the United States.
Мы понимаем и отдаем себе отчет в том, что это будет непростой путь с учетом той деградации, в которой, к сожалению, находятся отношения между США и Россией.
We understand that the way to that would be difficult, taking into account the current state of degradation of relations between the US and Russia.
И это, как я уже многократно говорил, не наша вина, что российско-американские отношения находятся именно в таком состоянии.
And as I have repeatedly said, that is not our fault that the Russian-American relations are in that poor state.
Но Россия готова и хочет восстановления полноформатных отношений с Соединенными Штатами.
But Russia is ready and wants to restore the full-fledged relations with the United States.
Повторяю, исходим из того, что это будет непростой путь, но мы готовы пройти и свою часть.
I repeat, we understand that this will be a difficult way, but we are ready to play our part in it.
И сделать все, чтобы вернуть российско-американские отношения на устойчивую траекторию развития.
And do everything to return the Russian-American relations to the stable and sustainable development track.
Это пошло бы на пользу как российскому, так и американскому народам.
This would serve the well-being of both Russian and American peoples.
И позитивно сказалось бы на общем климате в мировых делах, учитывая особую ответственность России и США за поддержание глобальной стабильности и безопасности.
And would have a positive effect on the general climate in the global affairs, taking into account the special responsibility of Russia and the US to sustain global stability and security.